how do you reduce the risk of failure in your SAP integration? It's a common question that I often get about what's actually important for you when you're developing your SAP integration to make it robust, make sure it supports all the requirements that you have. And it does cover a few things like support, testing, transport, and how you can actually build robust integration. But before we get started, there is a concept that's important, and this is, what does it cost for you, or what does an error cost you? And obviously this is really different depending on your industry, what type of integration that's going, and stuff like that. But there is two aspects of this. So first off, you are an integration developer. Whenever there's an error, you see that you must spend an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours on fixing this issue, and that's time you could be spending on something else, or you could outsource that and make someone else try to find the solution, fix it, and that's all a cost to the IT organization to develop this thing. But the other thing is that on the other side of this, you have created this integration for a specific purpose. For business case or business process that should be running, and because of this failure, some part or the full process may not be running. And there's obviously a lot of factors that covers in, or goes into this. So I was working at a client one time, and he said, well, if you delete this database or enter it in some way, the production will not work for a number of hours because we need to recreate it, and it costs, I don't know, €1 million an hour because the production is down. And obviously that depends on the system, the landscape, but there is a huge cost on what it means if something is down. So it could be the production. It could also be that the customers cannot order on your systems, and it is Black Friday and your systems is down. It's some challenges that you need to understand. Where does these things come from? So there's obviously the support process that you must have in place, and I guess there will be errors. Otherwise, you'll probably be spending too much time up front on trying to reuse and figure out what all the possible errors that could come. And we know in real life, customers are always right about creating some new elements of processes and stuff like that. And I think that really makes sense. In the PI world, I've often talked about, or consider this zero error mentality, that you go through the log and you see, okay, there's actually a log here. How do we prevent it? How do we remove it? And I think a lot of that could also apply to a CPI world, that every time there's an error, you say, okay, what's the root cause of this? Try to resolve it, build in some robustness, and we'll cover that later about how you can handle this thing. So each time an error occurs, you find the bug, find the reason, and build in some robustness on it. And that means that in the long run you will not have any errors, because every time you get a new one, you fix it, you resolve it, move it into production, and then you would not see that error more. And then there's obviously something that depends on how complicated the error handling and resolution becomes, because there could be this once in a month or once in a year type of error that's like, okay, let's not spend too much time on engineering a solution that will back up the methods, handling things in a specific way. So it obviously depends on what you can do. If you do not go for resolving all errors, at least you should have a way that you can set up filtering for these type of messages that make it easy for you whenever something fails to go and see, okay, this has failed, how do we resolve it? So the person that's supporting this incident or this integration a year from now, when he sees the same error, he knows, oh, okay, this is just this, and this is how to resolve it. So he does not need to spend the mental capacity on finding these things. I do believe that testing is also a good way to find a lot of the bugs that occurs in your landscape. And there's obviously a lot of things and concepts you can consider when doing testing. There's always the easy way. We send a simple message, we go through and we see, oh, it's delivered, everything is okay. And that works okay. But once you get into more complicated scenarios and logic, it becomes a lot more difficult to actually test these things and see how to deal with it. I believe that you should be setting up automated test cases that will allow you really simple, or as a developer, to run different scenarios with a click of a button, and then you can actually see, so this is how my integration works. These are the challenges that we have, and based on that, you have a good idea about what to do. If you do a lot of Groovy scripts, you should probably also have some unit tests for the Groovy scripts that would allow developers, whenever they are developing, to fix and resolve issues before they even deployed to the CPI system. So the more tests you can do there, the better. And no matter how much automated test, you probably will still need to be doing some manual test, either because the automation would not work or because you would need some larger scale process in place to handle this. And there's a lot of frameworks. You can either use some of the management tools or the full test automation tools for it, or you can just create some test cases that users can execute manually. But at least have a lot of automated tests on UI flows to make sure that they work as expected. Then one of the other errors that I often see is this part about transport process. How do you make sure that everything is working as expected, that you're able to transport things correctly, that you have control over what you're transported, and that you not by mistake moved some strange object into production without really knowing why we did that, what was the reason for this. So you need to be sure that you know what you're transporting. You need to control and deploy the correct version of a specific iFlow. On that process, you also need to know the configuration, know what to apply, and remember to apply the production URL, the whatever kind of keys that exist in these things. And obviously, these are something that can be fixed pretty quickly, or some of them, if you have transported the wrong version, it may take a little while before you actually know what's going on. Is it because of a version? Is it configuration? Stuff like that. And configuration the same. The key and the username did not match on this system. Then you also need to be doing a code review, being able to see who have run certain code, being able to see what was actually the change behind this process. There's also an approval process, and I know this is also really important if you're SOX compliant business or have any or other similar audit log requirements, where you have the 4-eye principle that 2 people or 4 pair of eyes need to be looking at all changes and approving them. So developers cannot move their own code into production. And I know a lot of places even though you may have developers code and bases to transport, bases in most cases would not really know what is being transported. They just know that we have this, but not really what's going on. And obviously then another point of this is being able to trace why something was transported in a certain way. That will, if an error happens, you will then be able to see, okay, this was because Daniel did something on this issue, and then being able to resolve it. The last point is to build robust. You need to create integration that works even when something bad happens. So in a SAP PIPO world, it was really easy if you had asynchronous messages that fail to just have retried on them. In a CPI world, it's a little more complicated. You need to build it in and decide where is it that we need to be doing retry of this process. What is it the good processes behind this, and then how do you actually handle that flow? Is an important part of it. You should obviously be using the exception process, and so at least you should be extracting the error data. So for sometimes HTTP error will just return, we got this error 404, error or 503, and not really any content that is really useful in the or in the processing. So you should be adding scripts that extract this payload, put it into an MPL message, or something like that, that make it easier for supporters to be able to deal with it. You should obviously try to build recovery, build fail tolerance into it, and that there's a lot of different ways you can do that when you're building stuff on it. Then you need to have the challenge is that if you, in all your different processes, build whatever you feel like is a good way to handle these errors, you will get a completely unmanageable system. That there will be a lot of cases that works, or in some places that is challenges another, and you need to find a good way to handle that. So you need ideally a generic place where you say, okay, these are the, for instance, the Groovy scripts that we handle these processes in. If it's an HTTP error, these are the scripts, these are the ways we're dealing with it. And have it as a library. That means it's easier for customers or users to deal with. And then another thing, and I think that's probably all the way into the beginning of the development process, do agree on which kind of integration, which kind of interfaces that you have, and what's going on. But I guess, yeah, you will anyway figure out that there are some characters or some things that could behave differently than you would expect it to. But at least have a good understanding of the interfaces. One of the things that we have been working on in FIGAF is to improve the development process that will enable you to develop SAP CPI faster, easier. And it has a lot of the components that you need to support being able to filter messages. It has really a lot of features with test automation, that you can take an iFlow, create test cases, create mock of it and stuff like that. It can transport your iFlows. It can do full approval process so that you can see what is being changed compared to our production version in this one. And then you can look at the documentation and see, okay, what's actually changes between these two things. It is pretty easy to get started on. You can either look more on here, go to FIGAF just 30 minutes. There's a guide on how you can set it up, and this will cover test automation, transport approval process, setting it all up in a simple way that makes it easier for you to develop SAP integration. I hope this has been useful. If you liked it, please hit the like button, please hit the subscribe button. I will be releasing some other ideas, content in the world of SAP integration. So thanks for watching.